The bark didn't sound normal. It wasn't the alert bark Titan used for intruders. It wasn't the playful yip he gave kids at the park. It was something deeper, more primal. A sound Officer Silas Hayes hadn't heard in years, not since the K-9 unit found that missing boy half buried beneath the old fishing dock out in the Cascades. Tonight, Titan's bark echoed through the old Victorian house like a war drum, sharp and guttural. Something was wrong. And Silas knew better than to ignore it. It was just after 6 p.m. on a crisp October evening in Havenwood, Oregon. Leaves skittered across the pavement in little bursts of red and gold as Silas parked his cruiser outside 23 Elderberry Lane, a sprawling white house with green shutters, a wraparound porch, and a flawless picket fence. The home of Eleanor Mayhew. Everyone in Havenwood knew Eleanor. She was the town's living relic, 99 years old, sharp as a tack until recently, and famous for her homemade apple pies and her pew at the front of St. Augustine's every Sunday. She was also, in many eyes, untouchable. A symbol of tradition, godliness, and good manners. Silas didn't know her well. He'd moved to Havenwood a decade ago after a messy divorce in Salem and kept mostly to himself. Titan had been his partner from day one. They trusted each other more than anyone else. Tonight's call was simple, a welfare check. Eleanor had reportedly suffered a stroke earlier that afternoon. Her grandson, Joel Mayhew, had dialed 911 after finding her semi-conscious on the floor. Paramedics were already on scene when Silas arrived. The emergency seemed straightforward. But procedure was procedure, so Titan came along too. The moment they entered the house, Titan changed. It was subtle at first. The dog paused in the doorway, sniffed the air with rapid precision. Silas stepped inside. The scent of cinnamon and old wood filled the space, warm and oddly nostalgic. Paramedics were wheeling Eleanor through the living room on a stretcher. Her face was pale, one side slack, but her eyes moved. Wide. Alert. Joel, a pale man in his late 30s, greeted Silas with a shaky nod. "Thanks for coming, officer. We think it's a stroke. She's been off the last few weeks. Forgetful. Confused." Silas barely heard him. Titan had veered off. He wasn't sniffing furniture or greeting the paramedics. He was heading straight for the kitchen, body low, ears up. Silas followed, curiosity rising. "Probably a raccoon or something got into the root cellar," Joel called after him. "She's always storing stuff down there. Peaches, beans, you name it." Titan stood rigid in front of a heavy wooden door off the kitchen. His nose brushed the base of it. Then he whined, long and low. A sound filled with unease. Silas reached for the door handle. Locked. "Joel," he called. "You got a key to this?" Joel hesitated. "That's the old storm cellar. I haven't been down there in years." "Your grandmother kept it locked?" "Yeah. She's always been kind of possessive about that room." Silas gave the door a nudge with his shoulder. Still solid. Titan whined again, then scratched twice at the baseboard. That's when it happened. As the paramedics passed the kitchen doorway, Eleanor suddenly grabbed the railing on the stretcher. With surprising strength, she jerked her arm free and reached out, gripping Silas by the wrist. Her eyes were wild. Not confused. Not weak. Terrified. She stared at him like she was seeing something, someone, from long ago. Her voice rasped through clenched teeth. "The girl, in the cold earth, she has his eyes. Under the floor, she's still under." Silas froze. "Ma'am?" he asked gently. But Eleanor had already collapsed back against the pillow, her mouth slack, her pupils unfocused. Whatever clarity had seized her was gone. Joel rushed to her side. "She's delirious. She's been saying all kinds of weird stuff lately. Talking to people who aren't there." The paramedics nodded. Stroke patients. Sometimes the brain misfires. It's not uncommon. But Silas wasn't listening to them anymore. He was watching Titan, who now stood squarely in front of that cellar door, tail stiff, head tilted slightly. Watching it. Waiting. The rest of the night passed like routine. The paramedics left with Eleanor. Joel promised to clean the house and call in a nurse. Silas took his leave, but not before placing a small chalk mark near the cellar door. Just a hunch. Just in case. As he buckled Titan into the back of the cruiser, he stared back at the Mayhew house. Its warm porch light glowed like a beacon. To most, it was a symbol of Havenwood's good old days. But to Silas, it now looked like a stage. And something had been buried beneath it for a very long time. That night, he didn't sleep well. Silas Hayes had followed gut instinct more times than he could count. It rarely steered him wrong. But this time, it wasn't his gut, it was Titan's nose. And that made it even more urgent. The morning after Eleanor Mayhew's stroke, Silas stood on the porch of her Victorian home again, warrant in hand, the autumn wind nipping at his face. The early sun filtered through the massive cedar trees surrounding the property, casting long shadows across the porch floorboards. Inside, the house waited, too still for comfort. Joel Mayhew hadn't been thrilled when Silas told him he'd be returning with a search warrant. For what? Joel had asked, voice sharp with disbelief. My grandmother's not a criminal. I hope not, Silas replied calmly. But we have a dog trained to detect human remains, and his alert last night was enough to trigger concern. Joel had laughed it off. He probably smelled old meat. That cellar's always had a weird draft. Silas didn't laugh. Titan didn't bark unless there was something to find. Now, standing at the foot of the basement stairs, Silas adjusted his flashlight and clicked the switch. Titan sat beside him, eyes locked on the door ahead, the same door he'd barked at the night before. Silas didn't need further confirmation. The dog was wound tight, his body practically humming with focus. A crime scene technician finished unlocking the cellar door. The hinges creaked as it opened into a steep set of stairs. Cool, damp air rolled out, heavy with the scent of dirt and something faintly chemical, like bleach that had been used years ago and never quite faded. The cellar was neat. Rows of mason jars lined the walls, pickles, peaches, pears. Canned soups labeled in careful cursive. An old freezer sat humming in the corner, and the far wall was framed with stacked firewood and gardening tools. But one detail stood out immediately. A large section of the concrete floor near the back corner looked different. Most of the cellar floor was rough and cracked with age, original poured cement from decades ago. But this section? It was smoother, paler, and oddly clean. A perfect 6x6-foot rectangle. Silas signaled. Go ahead, boy. Titan descended the stairs in a controlled trot, nose working overtime. He sniffed the edges of the room but moved like a magnet to the fresh concrete. He paced along its borders, his tail stiff. Then, after a long sniff, he sat, turned toward Silas, and let out one sharp bark. That was his trained signal for a possible cadaver scent. The team moved fast. Silas radioed for ground-penetrating radar, and within the hour, a technician wheeled in the equipment. They scanned the slab. A tense silence stretched in the cellar. Then the tech looked up. There's a void about 4 feet down. Something's off. This area doesn't match the soil density under the rest of the room. Silas didn't hesitate. Start drilling. The jackhammer roared to life, echoing off the cellar walls. Titan retreated to the stairs, watching with wide eyes. Silas stayed close, every part of him tight with anticipation. Dust filled the air as the concrete shattered away in chunks. And then came the smell. Rot. Old, wet plastic. Mildew. And something worse. The workers stopped when they hit cloth, a faded, mold-speckled blanket, wrapped in layers of black plastic sheeting. One of the techs pulled out a gloved hand and looked at Silas. "There's something inside." The medical examiner arrived minutes later. A full forensic dig would take hours, maybe days. But even in the early stages, it was clear what they had found. Human remains. Wrapped. Buried. Hidden for decades. Silas stood back and looked around the cellar. The neat jars. The smell of canned peaches. The careful perfection. And the horror beneath it all. The news broke within hours. By sunset, the quiet streets of Havenwood buzzed with whispers. Eleanor Mayhew's root cellar. A girl's body. 30 years ago. God, could it be? Silas didn't go home. Instead, he drove to the station and pulled every file from 1995 he could find. He set up camp in the evidence room, Titan curled at his feet, while he combed through the town's forgotten history. It didn't take long. Lily and Parker. 16 years old. Reported missing August 13, 1995. Last seen on foot around 3 p.m. She was described as bright, sweet, with long auburn hair and a chipped front tooth. Honor student. Volunteer at the animal shelter. Gone without a trace. The file was thin. Too thin. Original officers had done a standard search, questioned family, neighbors, school friends. Most leads went cold within a week. The official narrative: she ran away. Maybe hitched out of town. No signs of foul play. Just, gone. But one note caught Silas's eye. Witness statement: Sarah Parker, mother. Lily told me she was going to help Mrs. Mayhew with her garden that afternoon. Said she'd be back by dinner. Silas froze. Eleanor Mayhew. The same woman now lying in a hospital bed. The same woman whose basement had just given up the secret it held for 30 years. He flipped to the officer's notes. They had questioned Eleanor, once. She claimed Lily helped her trim the hedges for an hour, then left. No one had doubted her. Why would they? She was Eleanor Mayhew. Church lady. Pie baker. Everyone's grandma. Silas sat back, exhaling slowly. Titan lifted his head, sensing the tension. 30 years, Silas muttered. And no one looked twice. He dug deeper into the file. The search grids. The cadaver dog reports. The handwritten notes from a deputy long retired. Then another detail struck him. August 14, 1995, the day after Lily was reported missing. Work order, paid to Jack Trenton, local handyman. Repair job for Eleanor Mayhew. Reason for work? Pour new slab in root cellar. Fix leak. Silas closed the file and stared at the page. This wasn't coincidence. This was cover-up. And someone trusted, respected, adored, had orchestrated it. Outside the station, night settled over Havenwood. The streetlights flickered on, one by one. Wind rustled the high pines. In the distance, the church bell rang 8 times. Silas walked to his cruiser and opened the door. Titan jumped in without hesitation. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Tomorrow, they'd go back. There were still rooms in that house untouched. Secrets buried not just under concrete, but in drawers, closets, journals. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was a betrayal soaked into the bones of the town. And Silas had every intention of digging it all up, one secret at a time. The house was still taped off when Silas pulled into the driveway the next morning. The yellow police tape flapped in the cool wind like a warning flag. The crew had wrapped up overnight after recovering the remains, human remains, from beneath the cellar floor of Eleanor Mayhew's home. What they found wrapped in rotted plastic and layers of old linens wasn't just a horror story. It was a name, a girl long whispered about, whose disappearance had haunted Havenwood since Bill Clinton was in office. Lily Ann Parker. 16. Gone without a trace in the summer of 1995. Back then, Silas was still in high school 3 hours south of Havenwood. He remembered the news clips, missing posters, candlelight vigils, crying parents on the courthouse steps. But like most unsolved small-town tragedies, Lily's story faded with time. It had become part of the town's mythology, an unhealed scar buried under years of silence and Sunday sermons. Until now. Silas sat in the dim records room of the Havenwood Police Department, surrounded by cardboard boxes, yellowing manila folders, and the faint hum of old fluorescent lights. Titan lay curled beside his desk, chin resting on his front paws, alert but quiet, always listening. Silas flipped open a worn case file marked Parker, Lily A. written in blue ink. The first page was a typed incident report, dated July 12, 1995. Missing person. Last seen wearing a denim jacket, red sneakers, and a faded Guns N' Roses t-shirt. Reported missing by her mother, Sarah Parker, after she never came home from volunteering at Eleanor Mayhew's house. His brow furrowed. She was last seen at Eleanor's house? He read on. Apparently, Lily would occasionally help the elderly woman with gardening or small chores, part of a local youth program back then. Several neighbors had confirmed seeing her bike up Elderberry Lane that afternoon. But Eleanor told police Lily had only stayed an hour and then left, to meet friends. There were no witnesses to that departure. No cameras back then. No cell phone pings. Just a trusted old woman's word. Silas leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He thought about that concrete slab. The date stamped on the permit, July 13, 1995, was the very next day after Lily went missing. It had been filed as a non-structural repair. A leak in the root cellar, Eleanor claimed at the time. A local handyman named Clyde Fenwick did the job. Paid in cash. Silas pulled that file next. The invoice was simple. No red flags, unless you were now standing in 2025 with a body in your custody. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Had they really just taken Eleanor's word for it? Back then, she was already in her late 60s. A widow. Church-going. Donated every year to the fire department's turkey drive. People baked her pies just to get her recipe. Who would have thought she could be lying? The silence in the office was interrupted only by the rustle of old paper and the occasional tick of the wall clock. Outside, the rain started again, steady and cold, tapping on the windowpane like nervous fingers. Silas turned to a folder marked Interviews. He scanned the page. Officers at the time had spoken with classmates, teachers, the girl's mother. Most of them said the same things. She was sweet. Always smiling. No enemies. She loved drawing. Said she wanted to be an artist. A few noted that her father had walked out when she was a baby. She lived alone with her mom, Sarah Parker, in a small one-story house on the edge of town. No siblings. No boyfriend. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for the way the case simply stopped. No further leads. No witnesses. No body. Until yesterday. By late afternoon, Silas was back in his cruiser, sipping lukewarm coffee from a gas station thermos. Titan sat up as they passed the cemetery on Old Pine Road. Silas didn't say anything. But his mind was still spinning. He knew there was more to this than just an old woman snapping in her final days. Why Lily? Why her? If it had been spontaneous, a break-in gone wrong, a mistake, something out of character, it might explain things. But this felt personal. Calculated. He reached for the photo from the file, Lily Ann Parker, age 16, smiling in front of her school building. Long brown hair. Slight dimple on the left side of her cheek. Bright hazel eyes. Kind. Trusting. And now, gone. 30 years of silence. 30 years of people thinking she just ran off or got lost in the woods. And Eleanor Mayhew had been baking pies and singing hymns every Sunday like nothing ever happened. Silas's hands tightened on the wheel. This wasn't just about uncovering the past. This was about confronting a lie the entire town had been living with, for 3 decades. He drove toward the Parker residence, a small blue house tucked between maples just starting to change color. Sarah Parker still lived there. He had called ahead. She'd agreed to see him. As he stepped out of the car, Titan at his side, Sarah opened the door. She was in her 60s now, her once black hair shot through with gray. She wore a sweater over a faded work shirt and jeans. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was strong. "You found her," she said simply. Silas nodded. Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall. "I always knew. Somehow. I knew she didn't run away." He stepped inside, hat in hand. Titan sat respectfully by the entry. Silas didn't say much. Just handed over a plastic evidence bag with Lily's old necklace, recovered from the cellar near the body. Sarah took it gently, clutching it like it was still warm from her daughter's skin. "They took everything from me," she whispered. "I'm sorry it took this long," Silas said quietly. Sarah looked up, eyes clearer now. "Don't be sorry. Just finish it." He nodded once. That night, Silas sat by the riverbank with Titan. The stars overhead shimmered behind fast-moving clouds, and the water reflected the sky in ripples. The town was going to explode with questions tomorrow. But he already had one more lead, and one more trip to make. He pulled out the photo again. Not Lily's, but a grainy, older image he found folded in the back of Eleanor's family Bible, tucked away in a box retrieved from the house. The photo showed a man, Arthur Mayhew, Eleanor's husband, standing with a young woman. Her smile looked familiar. Her name was scribbled in faded ink on the back, SP, Summer 78. Sarah Parker. The Mayhew house was still quiet when Officer Silas Hayes pulled into the driveway, Titan seated in the back of the cruiser, alert as ever. The warrant had been approved. It wasn't easy convincing the judge. After all, Eleanor Mayhew was still considered the spiritual spine of Havenwood. But the forensic evidence, the suspicious concrete slab, and Titan's certified alert for human remains had opened the door, literally and legally. Now it was time to step through it again. The autumn wind swept through the trees like a whisper of secrets as Silas approached the front porch. Joel Mayhew wasn't home. He'd taken leave from his job at the lumberyard to stay with Eleanor at the hospital. That left the house open to a proper forensic search. But today, Silas didn't want noise. No jackhammers. No concrete dust. No suits or cameras. Today, he trusted one thing, Titan's nose. "Let's go, buddy," he said, unclipping Titan's harness. The German shepherd bolted forward with restrained eagerness, his muscles coiled and tail stiff. Silas opened the front door and let him inside. The house still smelled like cinnamon and age, but now there was something else, too. A low tension, like the walls were holding their breath. He gave the simple command. "Search." Titan trotted straight to the cellar door, sniffed it once, then moved past it. Silas blinked. That was unexpected. Instead of stopping, Titan padded silently through the dining room and into the narrow hallway leading upstairs. He was headed for the master bedroom. Silas followed, boots creaking against the old hardwood floor. The bedroom hadn't changed since his last visit. A brass-framed bed, neatly made. Lace curtains swayed slightly in the cracked window. And at the foot of the bed sat an old cedar chest, its surface dusty but untouched. A small crucifix hung on the wall above it. Titan sniffed the chest but then moved to the floor just beside it. He paused. His ears perked up. Then, without hesitation, he began to scratch, claws tapping rhythmically against the hardwood. Silas knelt beside him, brushing his hand across the floor. At first glance, everything looked normal. But as he leaned closer, he saw it, just a slight gap between two of the floorboards. A tiny seam, barely visible unless you were looking for it. "Good boy," Silas whispered. He pried at the gap with his pocket knife. The board lifted with an old groan, revealing a shallow space beneath. Dust. A bit of newspaper. And a small, tin box, sealed tight and old-fashioned, like something out of a World War II footlocker. Carefully, Silas opened the box. Not gold. Not cash. Photographs. Dozens of them, black and white and faded, tucked together with brittle edges. Most were innocent enough: Eleanor and her late husband, Arthur Mayhew, standing by a fishing boat, posing at church picnics, dancing at town fundraisers. Some dated back to the 50s. But one photo made Silas freeze. It was newer. Color. Taken sometime in the late 70s or early 80s. In it, Arthur Mayhew stood beside a much younger woman, maybe in her early 20s. She was smiling, sunlit, beautiful. And very familiar. Silas turned the photo over. Written in faded pen. SP, Summer 78. His heart slowed. Sarah Parker. Lily Ann's mother. It wasn't just a passing resemblance. The woman in the picture was unmistakably Sarah, barely older than Lily had been when she vanished. But it wasn't the photo that bothered Silas most, it was the way Arthur looked at her. Hand resting casually on her waist. Their shoulders pressed close. And the smile on Sarah's face, not posed. Natural. Intimate. Silas stood slowly, trying to calm the storm churning in his gut. All this time, everyone had seen Eleanor as the perfect wife, the town's moral compass. But what if she had spent her entire adult life carrying a hidden shame? A betrayal? What if Lily Ann Parker wasn't just a volunteer gardener helping a sweet old lady? What if she was a living reminder of something darker? Silas gathered the photos, sealed them in an evidence bag, and leaned against the doorframe. His eyes scanned the room again, suddenly more aware of its silence, its stillness, its absence of anything truly personal. Everything here felt staged. Preserved. Like a shrine. Or a prison. Titan let out a low whine, bringing Silas back to the moment. "Let's finish the sweep," he said. They searched the rest of the house, but nothing else unusual turned up. No more hidden boxes. No more photos. But the questions, they were multiplying. That evening, Silas returned to the station. He laid out the evidence on his desk. The photographs. The case files from 1995. The timeline. The police interviews. Joel's handyman invoice, the one for the concrete job Eleanor ordered the day after Lily vanished. All of it pointed in one direction. But still, it wasn't enough. Silas needed something stronger than a trail of suggestion. He needed a confession. And for that, he'd need Eleanor to talk. But she was still in the hospital, weak and under sedation, barely able to eat let alone relive a 30-year-old trauma. He rubbed his temples. Titan rested quietly beside his desk, chin on his paws, eyes heavy but still alert. Silas looked at him, grateful. They had cracked tougher things together. But this wasn't just about evidence. It was about motive. If Eleanor Mayhew had taken Lily's life, why? That night, as the wind howled outside the station windows, Silas played the old questions over in his head like a broken record. Why had Eleanor buried the girl in her own house? Why keep the photo of Sarah and Arthur hidden, decades later? Was this about love? Jealousy? Shame? Or something even more complicated, something soaked in the kind of pain that festers quietly over decades? He didn't have the answers. But he was getting close. And Titan, loyal as ever, was ready to lead the way, into a truth the town of Havenwood wasn't prepared to face. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and wilted roses. Officer Silas Hayes stood quietly just inside the doorway, his badge catching the soft fluorescent light. Titan, his K-9 partner, sat beside him, silent, still, alert. The German shepherd's eyes never left the frail woman lying in the adjustable bed, her once proud face now gaunt and pale beneath a tangle of white hair. Eleanor Mayhew. The town's matriarch, baker of pies and singer of hymns, now lay cuffed to a hospital bed in the secure wing of Havenwood Medical Center. A guard stood outside. No visitors allowed. No press. Just Silas. And Titan. Weeks had passed since the body of Lily and Parker was discovered beneath the concrete in Eleanor's root cellar. DNA confirmed the identity. The remains were too decomposed to determine an exact cause of death, but there was no doubt, Lily hadn't left Eleanor's house alive. Silas hadn't rushed back for answers. He waited. Let the dust settle. Let the town absorb the horror. Let Eleanor's body heal from the stroke, even as her carefully curated legacy crumbled in the headlines. Now, finally, she was coherent enough to talk. Silas stepped forward. "Good evening, ma'am." Eleanor opened her eyes slowly, then narrowed them. Her voice came out weak, papery. "Come to gloat, Officer Hayes?" "No, ma'am," Silas said evenly. "Just here for the truth." Titan gave a low breath, ears twitching, tail still. He stayed near the door, his posture calm, but his eyes remained locked on Eleanor. He remembered her scent. Remembered the cellar. The concrete. Silas pulled the old photograph from his coat pocket and placed it gently on the tray table beside her bed. Eleanor glanced at it, then looked away. But not fast enough. "I thought your memory was gone," Silas said quietly. "That's what you told the DA." Eleanor's lip trembled, not from weakness, but rage. "That's my house," she whispered. "My legacy. My husband's name, my family's good standing. Do you think you understand any of that?" Silas didn't answer. He simply leaned forward and tapped the photograph once with his finger. The picture showed a young Arthur Mayhew, Eleanor's late husband, grinning beside Sarah Parker, Lily's mother. The handwriting on the back read, SP, Summer 78. That was the crack in the dam. Eleanor's shoulders shook. Her voice turned low, brittle, poisonous. "He loved her," she spat. "Not just a little crush. Loved her. I found the letter in his desk drawer a year after he passed. She was married by then, pregnant. I knew. I knew it was his." Silas said nothing. He let her speak. "I let it go. For years, I swallowed it. The lies. The betrayal. Until that girl came around." She turned her head slowly, eyes glassy. "Lily. With her hair like mine when I was 16. But her eyes? His. Arthur's." She smiled like him. She tilted her head the same way when she laughed. "You think a woman forgets that?" Silas shifted his weight, jaw tight. "So you killed her?" "No," Eleanor hissed. "I corrected a mistake." Titan stood now, slowly, and let out a soft, low growl. Not loud, but unmistakable. The kind of growl that came from sensing something dark, something foul, rooted deep in the emotional current of the room. Eleanor flinched but kept talking. "She came to help with the garden. Said she wanted to interview me for a school project. I invited her inside, offered her lemonade. She didn't suspect a thing. There was no remorse in her voice, only obsession. A poisonous mixture of pride and old grief. I asked her about her father. She said her mom never talked about him. That sealed it. That was all I needed. I had the rope in the pantry. No one heard. No one saw. She never screamed. Silas's throat tightened. The image, Lily, 16, trusting, kind, shattered into pieces inside his head. And then you hired someone to pour new concrete. Eleanor smiled, satisfied. A leak, I told him. Emergency repair. Paid in cash. He was happy for the work. Young man. Left town the next year. Silas looked down at Titan. The dog stood like a statue, stoic, loyal, but changed. They both were. Why now? Silas asked. Why the cryptic words that night? If you wanted to die with the secret, why tell me anything at all? Eleanor's eyes closed for a moment. Her voice softened. Because God wasn't listening. I prayed. Every Sunday. Sang louder than anyone in the choir. Baked pies for the sick, knitted hats for the homeless, and it was all a lie. A rotten core under a beautiful skin. She turned her head to the window, where gray clouds gathered outside. I saw her face again that day. When I collapsed. She was standing in the corner. Not angry. Just, waiting. Silas nodded once. You saw your victim. I saw my sin, she whispered. He took the photograph back, slipped it into his pocket. She wasn't his, he said quietly. Eleanor blinked. What? Silas stepped closer. The DNA test. We ran one to confirm Lily's identity. Her father wasn't Arthur Mayhew. The silence was thunderous. No, she said, shaking her head. No, that's not true. It is, Silas said. Your husband didn't betray you. Lily wasn't the stain on your legacy. She was just a girl. A child. Innocent. Eleanor's lip quivered. Her eyes welled, but not with sorrow, with disbelief. Her delusion unraveled in real time, right there in that sterile room. You murdered someone for a lie you created, Silas added. And you spent 30 years living inside it. Eleanor didn't speak again. She turned her face to the wall, her body shaking with something between fury and shame. Her hands clenched the sheets. Her voice never returned. Silas stepped back. Let's go, Titan. The German shepherd moved instantly, silently falling in step beside him. As they left the room, Silas didn't look back. Outside, the air was brisk and smelled of pine. Havenwood was quiet again. But something had shifted. For years, this town had worshipped a woman who hid a grave beneath her feet. And it took a dog's nose, and a dying whisper, to finally tear off the mask. The verdict came in just after noon on a rainy Thursday. Guilty. On all counts. Eleanor Mayhew, once the town's beloved matriarch, pie baker, and church leader, was convicted of first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed with Havenwood locals, some in stunned silence, others whispering behind tissues, tears slipping down their cheeks. No one had ever imagined that the same woman who led prayer circles and taught Sunday school had buried a 16-year-old girl beneath her own home. But Silas Hayes wasn't there for the courtroom drama. He watched the news from a distance, standing outside the precinct with Titan by his side, his rain jacket pulled tight as the Pacific Northwest drizzle soaked the streets of Havenwood. Justice had been served. The cold case solved. The monster unmasked. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not even close. Later that evening, Silas drove out to the edge of town. The Parker family farmhouse sat quiet and still, paint peeling, shutters loose, but the porch light was on. Sarah Parker opened the door before he even knocked. Her eyes were tired, but kind. She'd aged 20 years since Lily vanished. Now, with the truth out, she wore her grief like an old coat, familiar but unbearably heavy. "Come in, Officer Hayes," she said softly. "I've been expecting you." Titan padded quietly behind Silas, his paws leaving faint prints on the floorboards. The house smelled of lavender and dust. On the kitchen table sat a shoebox filled with Lily's old belongings, bracelets, school notes, a diary, a faded Polaroid of her at the county fair. Silas placed a small evidence bag next to it, containing a silver heart-shaped locket found in the root cellar. Sarah's fingers trembled as she picked it up. "That was her favorite," she whispered. "I thought she lost it. I used to hope that maybe she was still out there somewhere." Silas didn't know what to say to that. No words would ever make it right. After a few quiet minutes, he pulled the photograph from his coat pocket, the one that had cracked the case wide open. Arthur Mayhew and a younger Sarah Parker, laughing together, leaning into each other like lifelong friends. On the back, in Arthur's handwriting, SP, Summer 78. "I had to ask," Silas said gently. "Was there ever something between you and Arthur?" Sarah studied the photo for a long time. Then she smiled, sad, but clear. "No. Arthur was a friend. Just a friend. That was taken at the summer festival. He was helping out at the church booth. We laughed a lot that day, that's all. Nothing more." Silas nodded, but the tension in his jaw remained. Eleanor believed otherwise. Sarah's expression didn't change. "She always hated me," she said simply. "I never understood why. I guess now I do." Silas exhaled slowly. "We ran a DNA test, standard procedure when confirming remains in a cold case. It's conclusive. Arthur Mayhew wasn't Lily's father." Silence. Then Sarah sank into the chair behind her, the photo still in her hand. "So, she killed my daughter over a lie. A delusion." Silas didn't respond. He didn't need to. Titan rested his head on Sarah's knee. The woman reached down, gently stroking the canine's ears, her hand trembling but thankful. "She was just a girl," Sarah whispered. 16. She wanted to be a vet. She used to sneak strays into the garage when she thought I wasn't looking." Silas allowed her the space. After a few minutes, he stood to leave. "You brought her home," Sarah said quietly. "No one else ever did. Thank you, Officer Hayes. And thank your partner too." Silas gave a small nod and whistled. Titan rose to his feet, nuzzling Sarah's hand one last time before following his handler out into the night. A week later, Silas and Titan walked along Havenwood Lake, just beyond the old trailhead where Lily used to ride her bike. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Ducks drifted lazily near the shoreline. The world felt quieter now. 30 years, Silas murmured, tossing a stone into the water. And all of it built on nothing. Just fear. Jealousy. A misunderstanding. Titan tilted his head, listening. Silas chuckled bitterly. "Sometimes I think you understood all this before I did." The dog barked once, softly, as if in agreement. They stood in silence for a long while, two figures framed against the deep blue of the lake and the evergreen surrounding it. The town would move on. People would heal, some faster than others. But the scars would remain. Beneath Havenwood's picture-perfect exterior, there would always be the memory of what had been buried, and what it took to finally dig it up. Some secrets rot quietly in the dark for decades. Others bark loud enough to finally be heard. Blue Square, thank you for joining us on this journey through Havenwood. This story wasn't just about uncovering a murder, it was about the power of truth, no matter how long it's been buried, and the bond between a man and his dog who refused to ignore what others overlooked. What do you think was the real tragedy in this story, Eleanor's actions, or the silence of an entire town? Backhand index pointing down, comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.